After many days of careful consideration, torn between reason and real-world pressure, Hai ultimately chose the path he knew was far from safe, taking out a bank loan to buy the restaurant. This was not just a simple financial decision, but a major trade-off that placed both his and Tiểu San's future into a new spiral of responsibility. Hai understood that once the debt figures appeared on the bank documents, everything would no longer be a trial or an estimation, but a binding commitment that had to be maintained through real performance, revenue, and daily stability. Yet if they stayed still and refused to change, their lives would remain trapped within old limits, with no clear way forward. When Tiểu San learned about this decision, she fell into a prolonged state of worry. She did not directly oppose it, but deep inside she constantly felt an unexplainable unease. The large loan amount meant that even the smallest mistake could lead to long-term consequences. In the nights that followed, she often lay awake, torn between worrying for Hai and worrying for their shared future. However, when she saw the determination in Hai's eyes, and how seriously and methodically he prepared every procedure step by step, Tiểu San gradually understood that this was not an impulsive decision. In the end, she chose to stand by his side, not to eliminate the risks, but to face them together with him. The loan application file was completed after multiple layers of inspection and verification. Every step was carried out carefully, from financial capability assessment, asset appraisal, to signing binding contractual terms. When the bank officially disbursed the funds, Hai entered the stage of taking over the restaurant with a mindset that was both cautious and determined. The handover and signing of the transfer agreement from the previous owner took place in an apparently stable atmosphere. All documents were cross-checked, and all parties confirmed the process in order. In the early days after the takeover, operations still ran relatively smoothly, creating the impression that things were on the right track, at least on the surface. However, as Hai began to dig deeper into management and re-examine the entire documentation system, he gradually noticed inconsistencies scattered throughout the legal records. At first, they were only small details, easy to overlook if not carefully checked. But the more thoroughly he reviewed them, the more obvious the irregularities became. Some items in the contract did not match the accompanying documents, and there were sections showing a lack of consistency between related papers, creating a patchwork feeling across the entire documentation system. Not only that, but the revenue figures also began to reveal suspicious points. The numbers recorded previously did not fully reflect the actual operating reality, showing signs of underreporting during certain periods. These discrepancies were not easy to detect from a general overview, but when cross-referencing each time period and individual report, the inconsistencies became increasingly clear. This forced Hai to question the accuracy of all the information he had received before deciding to take over. Most notably, the biggest issue gradually surfaced in relation to the ownership rights of the land where the restaurant was operating. During deeper inspection of related documents, Hai discovered a gap in the legal paperwork chain, a vague point that directly affected the legality of usage rights. This loophole was not explicitly stated but hidden within inconsistencies between documents, between recorded information and actual legal status. This ambiguity made the entire legal structure of the asset no longer as solid as it had initially appeared. From these discoveries, Hai began to reassess the entire transaction process, every signing step, and every document that had been previously confirmed. Each small detail now carried a different weight, no longer just administrative procedures but becoming critical links that could affect the entire decision he had made. Meanwhile, Tiểu San remained by his side, following every development with him, sharing the pressure as everything gradually became more complicated than they had ever initially imagined. As the situation gradually escalated beyond its initial control, Hai began to clearly sense that the troubles were no longer limited to discovering irregular documents. They had entered a far more serious stage. He unexpectedly received a notice requiring the temporary suspension of all restaurant operations, issued by a party involved in a third-party legal dispute. This notice was not merely a reminder or a routine inspection. It was a binding decision that brought the entire operational system of the restaurant to a standstill. The stated reason was that the transfer contract between the parties was not considered fully valid under current legal regulations, and there were also signs of suspicion regarding the transparency of the asset transfer process. This immediately made the situation far more tense than Hai had ever imagined. All the assets he had just taken over, including the restaurant area, the swimming pool section, and the accompanying recreational facilities, were placed under review, and could even face the risk of being frozen to serve investigation and verification procedures. Faced with a situation that had pushed him into a passive position, Hai did not choose to silently accept it. He understood that if he did not step forward to protect his rights, everything could quickly spiral beyond control. After much consideration, Hai decided to seek professional legal assistance and officially hired a lawyer to represent and defend the entire transaction he had participated in. This was a crucial step, marking the shift of the case from internal negotiation to a clear, structured legal dispute. Soon after the lawyer became involved, the atmosphere of the case began to change. Documents were systematically recollected, and every contract, appendix, and related record was carefully reviewed. The legal battle officially became more intense as both sides continuously presented conflicting evidence. The seller side insisted that the entire transfer process had been conducted transparently, that Hai had fully agreed and voluntarily signed the contract, and had been provided with all necessary information before putting pen to paper. They argued that any later complaint had no legal basis, and that responsibility could not be reversed simply due to doubts arising after the transaction. However, Hai's legal team went deeper into analyzing every detail in the original documentation. Through careful cross-examination, they quickly discovered several systemic inconsistencies. These discrepancies were not limited to a single document but appeared scattered across multiple records, forming a chain of irregularities that could hardly be considered coincidental. In particular, some crucial information had been concealed or not fully disclosed in the initial paperwork, making the entire legal picture fundamentally unclear from the very beginning of the transaction. These findings became an important foundation for Hai to continue pursuing the case, even though the road ahead remained highly complex and pressured. Each working session, each exchange of documents, only increased the tension, but at the same time gradually revealed the true nature of the underlying issues that had existed from the start. Hai was forced to face the reality that what he had thought was a simple transaction was, in fact, layered with far more legal complications than he had ever anticipated. Throughout this entire process, Tieu San remained by Hai's side as an important emotional anchor. She clearly witnessed the growing pressure weighing on him, not only financially but also through the prolonged stress of handling the case step by step. At times, Tieu San herself could not avoid feelings of exhaustion and confusion as everything unfolded too quickly and too complexly, far beyond what they had prepared for. There were even moments when she thought about giving up, not because she lacked faith in Hai, but because the overall pressure had become overwhelming. However, every time she saw Hai's persistence, the way he refused to give up despite continuous setbacks, Tieu San gradually regained her own stability. She chose to stay, not only to accompany him but also to support him emotionally through the most difficult stages. Tieu San's presence during this period was not merely supportive, it became an essential factor in helping Hai maintain psychological stability amid constant turbulence. Although the future remained uncertain, both of them understood that the path they had chosen had to continue, at least until the truth was fully uncovered and all legal issues were resolved to their very end. After many court sessions filled with tension and intense arguments between both sides, the case finally moved toward its conclusion as the evidence was reviewed in a more comprehensive and transparent manner. Through the process of document comparison, file verification, and cross-checking of related information, the court determined that the previous transferring party had deliberately concealed critical legal loopholes, along with signs of fraud in the initial business documentation provided. The information that had been considered the foundation of the transaction did not accurately reflect reality, leading to fundamental discrepancies from the very beginning of the contract formation. Based on these findings, the panel of judges issued a final ruling in favor of Hoai. The transfer contract was upheld in a way that protected his legal rights, while responsibility was assigned to the violating party. Beyond clarifying the legal validity of the transaction, the court also ordered the responsible side to compensate for the damages incurred throughout the dispute process, including both financial losses and the impact on business operations during the period of interruption. As he left the courtroom, Hoai stepped out with a heavy but gradually easing heart. It felt like a long breath finally released after days of continuous pressure, as the accumulated burden at last reached its end point. Although the journey had been full of risks, and at times he had feared losing everything he had invested and built, he ultimately retained the most important outcome. It was not only the property itself, but also the affirmation of his decision to persist in pursuing the truth to the very end. Tiểu San stood beside him at that moment, her eyes reflecting both the lingering anxiety that had lasted throughout the entire ordeal and a sense of relief now that everything had reached a clear conclusion. She understood that what they had just gone through was only the first chapter of a longer journey ahead. Challenges related to finances, operations, and business stability were still waiting in front of them, far from over. However, at least at this point, both of them could look back and realize that they had not broken down at the very first major obstacle. Their persistence, their choice to stand together, and their refusal to give up under pressure had carried them through the most difficult stage. And that very experience became the foundation for them to keep moving forward, even though the path ahead remained uncertain and full of unknowns.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Nay thì mình tiếp tục đưa đến với mọi người video về câu chuyện của Tiểu San và Hải. Như mọi người ở trong video hôm nay thì mình cũng đã mang tới cho mọi người video về câu chuyện của Tiểu San và Hải. Bây giờ thì mình sẽ đăng tải lên và mình sẽ công chiếu vào 7 giờ sáng mai nha. Hôm nay thì mình làm video hơi trễ một xíu. Bây giờ thì trời cũng khá là khuya rồi, mắt mình khá mỏi rồi. Thì làm xong video này thì mình sẽ đi ngủ và ngày mai thì sẽ làm tiếp sau. Cảm ơn mọi người đã xem video và ủng hộ cho kênh của mình nhé. Bây giờ thì mình sẽ sửa lại một xíu rồi mai sẽ đăng tải nha. Cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều. Hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video sau. Tạm biệt mọi người.